I don't want to delay everybody's morning too long, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. People can join as they are able. I just want to say welcome to everybody who could join us today. We're glad that you're here and interested in chatting with us about maintaining your WordPress site. Hopefully you heard when you logged in that we are recording today, so we're hoping to send this out afterwards to anybody who wasn't able to make it and also to anybody joining us today. If you're not already familiar with Pixo, we are a digital consultancy in Champaign-Urbana, and we create custom websites, software, and applications that address unique challenges. I am Danielle. I am the account executive at Pixo, and I'm going to serve as the MC host today for you guys. I would like to have Jenna actually introduce herself next from our team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna Fry. I'm the account coordinator at Pixo. So I work with Danielle and Jason, and I'll be handling the details today. So I'll be putting some helpful information into the chat for you throughout the presentation. So keep an eye on that. If you have questions today throughout the presentation, you're also welcome to share those in the chat as we go through the content, and we will get to them either during the presentation or later on. We'll have a section for Q&A. You can also hold your questions until the Q&A if you'd rather ask them live. And then if a question happens to come up for you after you leave the room today and you want to connect with Danielle or J-Ray, I'm going to put an email into the chat today. I'll put Danielle's email into the chat right now. And you'll also learn more about how you can connect with us in kind of one-on-one time. We'll be talking about that. And as Danielle mentioned, we are recording today, and we're going to be sharing this recording with all of you and some other folks who didn't have time in their schedule today to make it.
Thanks, Jenna.
Of course.
And last but not least, I'm going to turn over the main part of the event to Jason Rambeck, our lead web engineer. I'm going to have him introduce himself and get started on our topic today with WordPress maintenance and covering 3 big topics of security, performance, and user experience. So take it away, J-Ray.
Thank you, Danielle. Yes, I am happy to be here. I first want to start out by saying that Danielle or Jenna may call me J-Ray at any point throughout this presentation, because that's what everybody calls me at the office. So it's not some music artist or new Marvel character or something. That is me they are referring to. Yeah, this is the stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis here at Pixo, is work on websites, and both doing new projects and consulting, but also helping think through maintaining and supporting sites as well. So I'd like to start off with a question for everybody. And I think Jenna's going to post it in the chat so if you can open up your chat and look for that question or the responses. I have sort of a multiple choice. But I'd just be interested to know what kind of roles people play on supporting a website that are here. So we have development, debugging. Do you update HTML or CSS? Do you do you do content, general oversight, or multiples of those, or something else? So if you just take a minute and building sites, content creation and management, testability, coding fixes, a lot there, development. This is helpful. Okay, so developers, people getting in the code. So that helps me a little bit to kind of know the audience and how quickly or how deeply to go into some of these things, and redesign as well. Okay, cool. Developer wannabe, sure. I think we're all developer wannabes at some level. All right, so let's carry on here. So really what this conversation is about is thinking through our websites, in particular WordPress. Here is what we're focusing on. And the question is why? Why should we think about these things? Why should we audit? And that's really what we're talking about today, is thinking about things that we should be reviewing, checking, auditing throughout all these different areas of how our website works. And I'm going to start off with sort of this idea of the canary in the coal mine. So some of you may kind of know what this is about. So back in the day, before we had high-tech detection devices, Coal miners would go underground, deep underground, and mine coal. And one of the dangers of that is toxic gas, in particular CO2, that would leak in and would be obviously very dangerous to the people working down there. So a canary, we determined that canaries would be susceptible to this dangerous or toxic gas more quickly than humans were. And so we'd have a canary in the cage that would be brought down there, and they could see the bird start to go into distress and start to get this sick feeling or potentially die before it would affect the humans that were working down there. So this was a way for them to have a low-tech way to see if there was a dangerous gas level that were rising where they were working. So in the same way, there's a lot of things on our website that could be invisible to us, that could be difficult to detect before they become problems, or maybe they are already problems, but they're just not visible to us. They're visible to our visitors and whatnot. So that then begs the question, here's a couple of statements that I think everybody will know are true, which is nobody notices when our website does what it should, right? It's kind of like design. Nobody notices good design because good design shouldn't be noticed, right? It should do what it does. It should be functional. Our website in the same way, people expect a website to work. They expect when they click a button, it's going to go to the right place. They expect or hope to find the things that they're looking for. So when everything is functioning well, nobody should really notice. However, everybody notices when something does go wrong. Wah, wah. And it's no fun for them or for us as the people who are behind the website trying to make it do what we want it to do and be successful. So the kinds of things that people run into, of course, are error pages, downtime, for any amount of time is bad, just not being able to get to the site at all. Slowness in navigating, clicking, waiting, clicking again, waiting. Nobody wants to do that. And then broken links. People find a useful page and then they click another useful link and it doesn't go where they need to go, whether that's an internal or an external link. And this is the most important part, I think, to understand, is that these kinds of things cause bad feelings for people who are coming to visit our site. For a lot of people, a website may be one of their only interactions that they have with us or our organization, and it causes people to feel frustrated. There's a broken trust there that may be hard to swallow, but if somebody is coming to your site and they're visiting other sites, whether they're competitors or they're looking for information, trying to find information upon multiple sources, and they see that your website isn't well maintained or isn't doing what it's supposed to do, there's a broken trust there. And then it also just looks unprofessional and make it appear that we're incompetent. So we want to avoid that if at all possible. So here at Pixo, one of the reasons we are talking about this is because we've experienced it. We've seen it all. Us as individuals, as a company, we've seen everything that can go wrong. And we've learned over the years to deal with it. And the way that we deal with it is we try to mitigate all this stuff through prevention. And we have something that we call scheduled preventative maintenance, which is a series of tasks. And I'll just jump through kind of a longer list of things, which actually is a medium list because it could get even longer than this, of things that we kind of keep an eye on and we routinely check when we are supporting a website. And some of these tasks are very simple. Some of them are a little bit more complex. And that's why I think it's important. And one of the reasons we thought this was an important thing to share with our friends and colleagues around, because it's something that oftentimes gets missed. Either people aren't thinking about it or they're not thinking about it on a regular basis. And so this is something that almost anybody can get into and work on. Some of it gets more complex. I know we have a lot of developers here, so this might be something that all of us can actually take action on all the way. But at the very least, this is something that should be on anybody who's responsible for a website on a list that they have, and work towards scheduling these items to be looked at on a regular basis.
And I promise I won't interrupt Jason too much during this presentation because he's got a lot of really great info to share. But there's no way, I think, even as you mentioned, that we could cover everything on all of this entire checklist. And so to help with that, just as an extension of this webinar, we set some time aside on our calendars if you would like to go through our entire checklist or ask any more specific questions. I know sometimes it's not easy to ask in a group of people something very specific to your own site. And we want to make sure that your questions don't go unanswered. I think Pixo is pretty passionate about doing this. We typically just do maintenance for sites that we have developed, but if we can be helpful in any way, we'd love to share that with you. And I think Jenna just posted in the chat a way you can schedule that after Thanksgiving break is when we have that kind of starting up, so you can schedule that time.
Thanks, Danielle. Carry on. The first area that I want to jump into here is about security. And knowing that here, everybody here is probably more experienced here than most in, if you touched code, you're probably familiar with WordPress. Some of this might be obvious, but I think it's still important to touch on because it's the most important part of security. But before I do that, I want to ask a question and do a poll here. So what percentage do you think of websites use WordPress? 5%, 10%, 40%, or 75%? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Got 40%, got another 40, got another 40. And Helen, you're gonna take a stab. 75%, okay. The 40s have it, all right? So WordPress runs on 40% of all websites. I think if you just look at the CMSs, I can't remember what the number is, maybe one of you knows, but it's higher than that. Obviously, everything that on the web consists of more than just a CMS. But from all the CMSs that live out there, WordPress is even higher on the list. Yeah, 80 to 90% sounds about right. So that's a huge target for hackers. And so security is it's its own industry, obviously, and there's lots of things that go into security. So we're not going to jump into a lot of the specifics here. This is more, again, about visibility, keeping our head on things that need to be monitored and checked and looked in on from time to time. And so this is the one area of things that we're talk about today. It is actually a thing that you do to prevent issues, right? Everything else is identifying potential issues so that you can then do something. But this here is, I guess it's a check too, but just a check for plugins, WordPress updates. And you can do this a number of different ways. I just want to pull up the WordPress health report. Well, you may be familiar with this. And this is something that I recommend doing at least once a month, potentially more. And a lot of the frequency on these things has to do with your tolerance for downtime or, budget, who has time for different things. So it's like kind of a balancing act of how often you want to check some of these things or do updates in this case versus how much available time people have. So I'm going to look at an example. I think I actually already have an example of the site health report. So this is a nice tool that actually includes quite a bit. And for this audience, there's a lot here I think that you might be aware of on top of just plugins and core updates. So I'll actually go ahead and open up a site that we have. I think it's here. This is one of our internal projects, by the way. This is a website. It's not really public. I mean, it's publicly available, but this is a project that we've built here over the last few years to help us build brand new WordPress websites. It's a sort of a framework for us to do a WordPress in the way that we want to do. It's highly developer friendly and developer centric. So I think some of you all went to my talk on modern WordPress. So this is actually a project that's come from that knowledge and understanding. and we have a sort of a public test site that we use to show it off. I'm going to jump into the dashboard, and I think it's under Tools, Site Health, and let it finish loading here. So if you're not familiar with the Site Health page, it's just a nice summary. They do a lot of things for us in this tool to check health things. The big one that obviously I'm trying to point out here is that we can see that we have a WordPress update that's available. This is a site that we don't keep up to date once a month necessarily, because it's a site that is just for testing. So we're not trying to keep it secure per se. So this does have an update that's available for WordPress. We can also see there looks like there's no plugin updates here. I think those would show up if there were, and it would show us that we have some available and point us to a link to go check them further and update those. But it's showing that we have some inactive plugins. And throughout the life cycle of your site, you'll stop using stuff and you might forget, maybe you can remove it. And code that, even though it's not enabled, can still be used by as a target by hackers and still be insecure. So we should remove code, any code that we're not using. Plugins are the easiest thing because they're just all in one directory there, and you can remove the plugin if you're not using it. The other thing we have here is HTTPS. Our site, again, is not running on HTTPS. Every public site should be. We'll get this site up on HTTPS at one point, but for us, it's not a big deal because, again, it's just a test site for us. But if you did notice this on your public site, this would be something to put on a list to follow up on, for instance. So that is our site health report. And I'll move along. The next thing to do, which is actually really, really simple for anybody to do, is just to audit user logins on all the different areas related to your website. So WordPress users, of course, hosting, who's got access to your hosting, whether it's a secure shell login to directly into the web server, or if you're running a cPanel or something that has a web user interface, whatever access you have to your users, just checking on those. We like to recommend at least twice a year to do that. You could do that more. Again, this all really depends on your unique situation. But really the biggest use case for this is that people leave your team. People no longer are with the organization, or they've moved to a different department or whatever it might be. And we trust them. We don't think they're going to do anything nefarious, but it really has to do with good practice, keeping things clean. If somebody doesn't need access, let's take it away. And a lot of times that falls through the cracks during those transitions. But if we have it scheduled to just check in on every once in a while, and it's on a list, we can just remember to do it. It just takes a few minutes usually, but it's a great addition to our practice to keep things secure.
Jason, it looks like we have a relevant question popping up in the chat here. If you wouldn't mind taking a look. Robert asks, do you have a preferred WordPress access tracking plugin?
What do you mean by access tracking, Robert?
So there are a few plugins. This came up a few years back for me. Somebody had a website where one of their users wouldn't admit to deleting some files and changing some settings, which made some of the site's upper admins rather unhappy. So I went in and looked at the broad variety of WordPress kind of access and use tracking plugins that are out there that will log like, this user logged in, this user went to this page, this user went to this plugin page, so that in that instance you could be like, oh no, user X at 7:03 on this morning changed the menu and removed this link. And they were particularly noisy and did a little bit more logging than I wanted, and so I never found one I was totally happy with, and was wondering if you had found one that you liked.
No, I haven't, to be honest, didn't know about any of these. So yeah, I haven't delved into that at all. And yeah, I'm not aware of those, but those are great tools if you need them. And again, I think, everybody could use those, but how useful they are, right? Like you're saying, if it's logging too much, is it just too noisy to make it useful? So yeah, I'd love to follow up with you on the one you do use. And
we stopped using that one because honestly, the site was growing larger, its size on disk rapidly because of the use tracking and logging, and not because of new content creation. Their log files were growing faster than their content.
Yeah. That's I could totally understand that. We run into that too, just with error logging too. If you have some error logs turned on fairly high, that can grow. So that makes sense. Well, cool. So I think the only other thing here to consider is other web services that are tied to your site. The top one that comes to mind is like domain registration, if that's an issue, or if you have a domain that is part of this. Just checking that one as well. So kind of thinking through all the different areas of access that people have to your site and auditing those on a regular basis, at least twice a year, in our opinion. Thanks. Yeah, your domain registry lapse. If you've been doing this kind of work for any amount of time, you've seen it. All right, here's the next area. And I put this under security because this has to do with disaster recovery and making sure that if something goes wrong, security-wise, or I guess data corruption-wise, you have a way to recover. And so backups can be a black box to people, especially if hosting isn't something that you're directly involved with. So I know there's several of us here that are on campus here at the U of I, and the campus has their own hosting resource. So sometimes we just ask somebody to provision us a server, we set it up or it gets set up, and they say it's backed up. And that could be fine, or should be fine, but we should know that they exist. We should ask for a backup every once in a while. Again, every few months. It really depends on your tolerance for how much data loss you're willing to tolerate, I think. So backups, I've been involved with sites where backups were running. They're running every day. I could see the files, and then you go to use it and they don't work. They're corrupted, something went wrong. So there's that level of things too. Again, since we have a more keen audience here, people that worked more closely and deeply in these projects, that's a thing to consider too, is actually grabbing a backup, whether you have it or you need to request it, trying to restore every once in a while and making sure that it actually does what it's supposed to do. Just documenting the backup schedule. A very common and healthy backup schedule is to have 7 days of backups, going back every day, going back 7 days. And then it's either weekly backups going back 52 weeks. You want to be able to go back a year, or potentially monthly backups, so that you can go back, back to January, February, or whatever the last months were, if you need to try to recover. And then of course, you also need to make sure that you have everything in that backup. And usually that's, well, code potentially could be in there, but that might be somewhere else that you always have available, but user uploaded files and your database. So again, if you actually take a backup, request one. The other thing about requesting a backup too is, especially if it's not within your control, is you can get an idea of kind of potentially, if there's bureaucracy there, how long it takes to get one. So and you can kind of be ahead of, if it takes you 2 days to get a backup and your site is down and that's why you need it, then you can kind of be aware to maybe talk to some people or figure something out to be able to get backups quicker. All right, so we're going to move on to another section here. I want to start off with a poll, and Jenna's going to put it here in the chat. There is a list here, 4 items. If you could guess as to which item here is the highest impact on user experience, and you could either answer as what you think is the highest impact when you're browsing the site, but the answer we're going to be looking at is user research of users in general.
And just to chime in as you're answering this question, I was telling Jason when we were putting this together, I had put out a question on my LinkedIn as a poll and asked, what were some of your frustrations in websites? And it was one of the most answered and commented on poll I'd put out there, because people are, experienced at using websites and they feel like they're experts and their opinion matters. And so it is definitely something people have an opinion on, is how their website should work.
Yeah, this is a difficult one. And as I go forward here, you'll see that the numbers are pretty close. They're not drastic anyway. And these are all important, to be honest. So I'm going to move on. Let's see. Choose one, but I know it's not the most important for most users, Mariana. Yeah. I think we all have individual preferences that might be different from the aggregate of all of society. So we're going to talk about performance. So that might reveal the answer to the question here. There was a study done on user experience and these different metrics or different areas of user experience. And top to bottom, the bottom being the largest area where people felt that there was they were affected by this area of user experience is the speed it takes to load a page, 75%. Above that, how easy it is to find what I'm looking for, how well it fits my screen, how simple the site is, and how attractive the site looks. So for a lot of people, this is something that is really, for clients that we work with, it's really good to compare and contrast, especially the top and the bottom numbers here, because how attractive the site looks is often there's a lot of time spent on design and making things look sharp and nice and good, which is always good, of course. But speed and performance often take a backseat. And so looking and knowing, identifying, having visibility into how well your pages perform is really important. So we're going to take a look real quickly at a tool that we use here at Pixo. It's probably one of the more popular tools to use for identifying performance, called PageSpeed Insights, which is a Google performance tool. They've recently revamped it, even within the last couple of weeks, I believe. I'm not sure when it happened, because as I was preparing for this, I noticed that the reports look quite different. I'm not sure what I think about it yet, but it has mostly the same content. It's just laid out a little bit differently. So I put a recommendation here to do this at least twice a year, but this really depends on your site, how often content is updated. If there's constant changes on your website, you might want to do this more. There's also ways to automate this, which we're not going to get into. We had a workshop that we did where we touched on it earlier in the year. If you have questions on that, follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those. So let's jump into PageSpeed Insights. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the link, or Jenna will, I think, to this reporting page. Now, PageSpeed Insights uses a tool called Lighthouse. It's actually built into the Google Web Dev Tools, which many of you may be familiar with if you've worked on sites at a development level or code level, which I will show in a second too. But this is a really nice tool here because it's just a web page that really anybody could go to at any level and just plug in a page to their site and just check their score. There's a ton more information than just the score, but why don't you visit this page real quick if you can. Grab maybe a homepage or a URL of a site that you're interested in, whether it's your site or a site that you know of that you think might be slow or might be really fast, and put it in, and we'll talk about the numbers in a second. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and pull up a report I already ran earlier for a project at the U of I School of Social Work. And we'll look at what their site's doing. The first thing I'll note here is that you have a desktop and a mobile report. They're both separate. And the reason they're separate reports here is because they get run separately, and the desktop or the mobile, I'll say, runs the test. So it downloads a page, but it does it throttling the bandwidth to, I think it's what they call a slow 4G, which is about 1.6 megabytes per second. And then I think it also throttles the CPU or simulates like a mobile device, right? Not a full powered laptop or even desktop machine. So it throttles it down to sort of simulate how things move once the page gets downloaded and then rendered, which moves a little bit slower than maybe your desktop. So in general, your desktop score and your mobile score should be different. Your desktop score should be higher than your mobile score in general. You might be doing, if those are different and your desktop score is lower, there's something probably really wrong with media queries or something you're doing to detect mobile versus desktop in some way, because mobile is just generally slower because it's throttled. So I'm going to jump through here. One of the new things they did is put at the top this core Web Vitals assessment with all this information. So I'm going to skip past that and jump to the score. And this particular site has a 98 score, which is really good. Anything above 90 is this green area, which is the best. I would say you're not hurting too bad if you're at 80 plus, but definitely below 50, you're in kind of frustration territory probably. And this score isn't perfect either. So if you're using this to make an assessment, you should sort of consider it kind of a rule of thumb, because it's not, this score can be off for some reason. For instance, Best Buy is an often a site that we use as examples when we're talking to people about this. They have their mobile site, they're doing something funky with it where this test shows it very, very poor, but it's actually not. And I'm actually not sure why it shows the kind of report it does. But there could be some unique things where this score isn't exactly accurate, but generally it's pretty good, both in the score and in all the metrics that follow that I'll go over in just a second. So outside of the score, we have these 6 main metrics. And again, I wasn't going to jump into these, but I think we have a more sort of high level audience here that's delved probably into some of these things before. I think it's worth going into them. Your first contentful paint is when you have something, and let me actually just show this film strip down below. If you can see, this film strip sort of shows how your page is rendering over time. The first couple of boxes are empty, so there's a bit of time as it's trying to load where nothing is showing. And then this here I would identify as the first contentful paint, where you're seeing something that feels like something is starting to load. And the next one looks like it is almost everything except for maybe the fonts, it looks like are not loaded yet. And then finally we're getting our fonts here, and then now everything's loaded on the page going forward. And so first contentful paint is probably this area right here. If you can see my mouse sort of moving on this third frame, where you can kind of see enough to kind of get the feel for what the content is. Speed index technically is kind of technical, but it basically means you can see everything that needs to be seen. And then largest contentful paint, I'm sorry, I got largest and first contentful paint mixed up. First contentful paint would be anything that shows up at all visual. Largest contentful paint would be something that's actually meaningful or had, a bit of content. Time to interactive is how long the web page takes before you can click on something or take an action. So sometimes that's like the JavaScript needs to load or whatnot. Total blocking time also is related to that. Things that are blocking you are the page from rendering. And then cumulative layout shift. The best way to describe this is like ads on a page tend to cause things to move. So if you've ever been on a page like a news site or something that has a lot of ads, and especially on your phone, when you're reading and you're reading a paragraph and then it moves on you because an ad slid in, that's called layout shift. Something moved. And the cumulative layout shift is sort of a number that says, all right, what are all the things that are moving on this page, and how soon are they loading and whatnot, and they have a number there that measures that. For desktop, it seems that all these are in green, they're in good shape. I like to sort of use the number, the speed index, and put 3.5 seconds as sort of a good target that's kind of mid-range of where you would like to be on a page. And so I'll switch over to mobile real quick and see where we're at there. And we're right about there on this site, 3.6 seconds. Where we're starting to see our first content about a second earlier, and our largest contentful paint somehow is under. Again, the speed index isn't quite exactly everything visual, so there's a little bit of mystery to it. It's kind of complex how they measure that, but it does make sense. Usually the numbers kind of go first contentful paint, then largest contentful paint, and then this one which it's similar to what we're seeing there. And then we also get our mobile version of our film strip here as well. So we're not seeing anything for the first little bit, then we get some content, and then we get into it. So I'm going to take a break here to look at the questions here. I don't know if Jenna or you've been looking at these, but do we have some questions here?
Yeah, so we had a couple of questions. One earlier from Robert about uptime monitoring tools. He asked, what are your current preferred uptime monitoring tools? And the other question that he asked was the benchmark for the page speed. And I think you mentioned that saying above 90 is great, obviously, and anywhere below 50 is where you get into frustration territory. So that seems to be answered to me, but the uptime monitoring tool is on the list.
Yeah, so we use a tool here at Pixo called Status Cake. And we might be able to put that in the, as a link for you in the chat. But Status Cake is, there's so many tools. And so I don't know all of them. Status Cake is reasonably priced and it does very well. Like we can tell it to check all kinds of things related to performance. We can choose a certain page. It reports very well. So for instance, in the way we use it, it sends a Slack message to us. We use Slack here internally for our chat, and we have a channel for certain support related things, and we can see if something goes down, and we can see when it comes back up as well. So that's a good way for us, just the way that we work. Yeah, everybody's kind of in Slack all the time, and so that shows up that way. But it can send emails, it can do all kinds of things. I don't think it does pagers anymore. I think back in the day, you could get a page when something went down. I think other than that, I'm trying to think of any other monitoring tools. I don't think that there are. I don't think it really matters, but that's a good choice. It's something that we are familiar with, but there's probably lots of other tools there that are just as good. Thanks, Robert. Yeah. So jumping back to our report here, we are a little bit lower on mobile, 84. I love to see it in the green. It really depends. There's certain things that are out of your control on a site. I know we do work with a lot of U of I sites, and there's certain things that we have to install that are part of the ecosystem that we are out of our control. So, you know, sometimes there's reasons for these. So just knowing though what those are and just being aware of them is really helpful, just to keep, again, visibility on this, checking on these every once in a while. One of the things that happens a lot is images get uploaded to a page that are huge, and the WordPress isn't properly resizing them potentially. And so this is a common area where I'll plug in a report here, look at a page, and I'll scroll down, and you can see, this is a good example. This page, I don't think probably passes this, like properly sized images. And I'll see this in red. And so this site, that it has properly sized images, so you're fine. But you know, you'll see how big, you know, your page might be 10 megabytes or 20 megabytes or something, because there's 10 images that are not properly sized, resized as they should be. So this is a good way to kind of detect that and be able to find, all right, let's add to the list something, a follow-up task to fix WordPress so it's resizing the images, or maybe just re-upload them and resize them before they get uploaded or something like that. A lot of this gets really into detail. We use this tool as developers here to really dig into performance metrics and identify server changes. There's a whole world of performance that you can dig into here. But I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can get out of using a tool like this. And one of the nice things about the tool is it also will detect that you're using WordPress and make some recommendations about WordPress specific things to keep an eye on to make these things better. So I want to jump ahead because we're starting to get low on time here. Just of interest, whatever site you're looking at might not be your site, but what was your score? If you checked a site, what were you seeing?
Yeah, I'm curious if anybody tried this on their own and if it was higher or lower than you
Yeah.
anticipated that number to be? Like, was it a surprise?
Right.
Looks like CNN.com is coming in at an 8, very
Mm-hmm.
low.
Okay, 48, 59 from Helen on the mobile side. Yeah, so it's something worth digging into then if you're not happy with those scores, to and look through all those opportunities that it recommends. You can get this tool is very helpful in identifying the potential areas that are the areas that are affecting that score and slowness, potential slowness. Cool. Well, we'll move on to the last area that we wanted to touch on today, which is user experience. And again, we are not getting into very deep things, but these are really basic things, again, that we've seen people just don't think about. We're all busy. A lot of times on website projects or people that own websites, there's just not clear communication and whose job it is to think about some of these things. So that's really the biggest point that I wanted to get across today, is just thinking about, hey, there's a handful of things that need to be looked in on from time to time. Different people might have the different capabilities to actually do something about it. Certain things like accessibility audits might be more up somebody else's alley. They might have more experience in looking at those things and delving into those specifics. And some things are basic that pretty much anybody can do. But identifying those things to check is really the point that we're trying to get across here. So again, this is a simple thing, broken links. Anybody can check for broken links, but they just don't get checked that often. And so there's certain tools out there to help do this. There's external link checkers, and there is link checker plugins. I have a plugin that I know is popular, but we haven't used, so mileage may vary. We'll link to that in a second, and I'll show the web page for that. But this is something that, again, I put a recommendation of every few months to scan your whole website for broken links. But again, it really depends on your needs. If you have lots of content that's changing on a regular basis, then you might want to check it more often than that. Because obviously, if nobody's touching the content on your site for 3 months or once a month, you don't need to check it because nothing's changing. I will say, even though your site's not changing, other people might have a redesign of their site that you're linked to, and it might be gone now. So it's not just your site and how often your site gets updated, but that's probably less frequently an issue of other sites changing than people adding content to your own site. So every few months, but again, it really depends on your needs of something to do. So I'm going to start off by, I'll actually first mention the plugin that I know is popular, which is the Broken Link Checker. It's really popular. 700,000 people use it. I've tried it out before. Haven't been happy with it. I think it's because of maybe the way that we develop our sites. We use a lot of advanced custom fields, and it just seemed like a struggle to configure it to scan those. I think if we could figure that out, it would be useful for us. We don't like to install plugins if we don't have to. So we have external tools that either we pay for that are easier and can be part of a developer-centric process. So this is something, though, that might be really useful for you. So it's worth checking out. Look into it. Again, we don't really have experience with it, but I know it gets around and people use it. The other thing that we have used from time to time is the W3C.org website has a link checker tool. This is not very pretty, but it gets the job done, and it's free, which is hard to find another free tool. So everything else is paid, or there might be a free version out there. If anybody has a recommendation, go ahead and post it, but these are the ones that we know about. So I try to check here. So you just put the URL of the web homepage usually, because this will spider or crawl your whole website and look for pages, and then follow all the links that are on those pages to make sure they're legit. So I'm scanning our starter kit webpage, and this doesn't have a lot of fine-tuned control, so it's finding a bunch of things like it doesn't like that it can't log into Facebook and or LinkedIn and see things. So that makes sense because you don't get to those pages unless you're logged in. So it can be a little bit hard to go through, but I know I purposely put a bad link in here. Yeah, bad link, yeah, to Google/bad link, and it found it. It was on this particular page here that I added it to. So this is nice. This is a nice tool because having an external tool, I'll just say external tool, it acts more like a real user in that sense. So if it can't get to a page because you're not logged in or whatnot, it's going to notice that it's just an external thing outside of your website. It's just more like something that's realistic. So that's broken links. Again, every few months, having a way to scan your whole website. If you have a good tool and a good process, shouldn't take much time, and you can help eliminate those issues. The other area is missing pages. So your own pages that are missing or have moved, the URLs have changed. This is called 404. When somebody visits your page, you'll get a 404. And this is a very popular tool called redirection. It's a plugin. And a lot of people don't know, and I'm going to jump over to it on our site. I think I already have it open. So on our starter kit site, redirection is a tool that helps you create redirects from pages that didn't exist. I'm sorry, from URLs to a new URL. So, and there's a really nice report on here that I don't think it's used often enough, which is called the 404 report. And so what this plugin does is it tracks anytime somebody tries to go to a page that doesn't work. And so I'll go ahead and just try that right now. And I'm going to go to a page called downloads. And we get a 404 page. And go back to redirection. And it looks like I called these other tests downloads. So if I refresh this, we'll probably get another example. And we get some more things in here. So downloads now shows up that somebody tried to visit that once. And so this is showing people who are trying to get to our site at a page that doesn't exist. May have existed before. Somebody could have typed something in wrong. I don't know. But the really nice part about it is it gives us a list at the top of which pages are people trying to get the most. This is especially helpful for when we do a redesign or a relaunch, or we've changed a lot of content and we've maybe missed some redirects that we didn't realize we needed to make. And so after a couple of days, the site's been up, we'll go ahead and look at this report and see, oh, wow, 20 people have tried to get to XYZ page. And we'll go, okay, let's create a redirect because we know we moved it over here. Sometimes a page actually doesn't exist. It's not relevant anymore. There's nothing to do. In that case, just leave it. It's fine. People are used to getting these 404 pages and will realize that it's missing. You shouldn't try to redirect somebody to somewhere if it doesn't make sense. So take advantage of this. If you're not using the redirection plugin, it's very helpful. You can do automation of, so when you can set it up so that if you change a URL of a page to something else, it automatically creates the redirect for you. So you can kind of get ahead of things. But this report is very, very valuable and something that you should be checking on. Again, what was the recommendation here? Twice a year. Again, it depends on how often your website gets updated. Moving ahead, because I know we're running out of time, I want to make room for your questions. This is the last one. And this is a very generic thing, but something that people don't do enough. A lot of, if people like you and I, people who are involved in running websites, whether you're building them or are in charge of them in some way, we just don't browse them the same way that our users will. And so really all this means is every once in a while you check your site, you browse it on a phone, on the devices that your users are going to be using. You try to fill out the forms, make sure that those messages and things are accurate, they're up to date, they're what people are linking to, what they should be linking to. Try out those links. Look at the navigation, try to get to some content that is available or that you have in your navigation, and make sure that that makes sense. Use your own search. That's something that's come up before, where search doesn't work the way that you expect. You search for a term and the thing, you find a bunch of documents, but not the main page that you expect it to find. So that's just a really good practice to get into, and schedule, again, however often it makes sense for you. Every few months seems a reasonable amount of time to do that. And the person that should do this is somebody who is familiar with the site and familiar with the audiences that they're trying to reach. So this might not be you, this might be somebody else. And this, because this isn't technical, this could be done by almost anybody that has that understanding of the audience and the content. So I'll leave it there. And I'm just gonna also touch base one more time. This is all part of this comprehensive preventive maintenance task list that we have, that we address whenever we look at a site and are going to support it. We look into at least considering checking in on all these different areas, and how often you do it, how much work you put into it. That's all variable. It all really depends on your specific needs. And we want to make opportunity for people to visit with us individually to go over that full list and kind of see how that applies to them. This is just something that we think everybody should be doing, and we want to do our part to let people know, take our experience from seeing things go wrong, knowing how to prevent it, and put this into people's hands so that they know they have another tool in their toolbox to keep things up, keep their users happy and satisfied, and that kind of thing.
That was fantastic, Jason. Thank you. And as he mentioned, he scratched the surface. So I said this earlier in the presentation, but we are extending options if you guys want to talk more by blocking off time on our calendar. If you would like to set up an appointment, you can do so with the link Jenna just shared, or just email me and we can figure out a time and see how much time would take to answer your question, because it depends. It's like one of my favorite phrases. It's not just a simple, quick answer to a lot of questions, because there's a lot of choose your own adventure type of paths you can go down. And I know we have some questions already that I think Jenna had one she was holding at least maybe, and then I think another one came through.
Actually, no, there aren't any more questions on the list. So if anyone wants to come off mute or put a question in the chat, you're welcome to do so.
I see one from Mariana.
Yeah, I think Mariana just asked one.
What is the safest approach to domain search, purchasing, and registration? To me, those domain sites all seem so sketchy and have weird pricing structures. Where do you all go for that? That's a good question. This actually doesn't come up a lot for us because we aren't doing a lot of brand new sites. So we don't search for domains that often. So if we're doing something, it's usually a subdomain for our Pixo domain, or we're dealing with other clients who are figuring that stuff out for themselves. But so I have a little bit of personal experience on this. I use there's a bunch of sites that do this, and it's been a while. Hover is a popular, I think it's hover.com. Maybe Jenna, you could look that up. I want to say it's hover.com is a popular and a reputable one that is good for registering domains on, and it probably has a good search as well. Namecheap is one that I've used personally that has a decent search on it. There's other tools out there that are just like for search, and they kind of recommend you to, if you want to buy a domain, they make money by you clicking over to one of their recommended domain purchasing organizations. But those are two that I've heard of, that I have experience with, that I think might clear you away from the seedier ones, the less reputable ones.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think I have used Hover before, or at least been on there. I haven't used it, but yeah, some of the sites I've used to like search, and then it's like you click on a button and then it's all secretive about who owns the domain and who you're going to pay and how much it's going to be. And it's, I haven't found something super trustworthy looking. So this is really helpful.
Cool. All right, Victor asked a question. Can you talk a bit about what to look in the end of life review? Yeah, you're looking at my long list. So This has to do with, it could be a number of things, but the big ones are usually server software. So PHP is a big one. So WordPress runs on PHP. And PHP has a new version out every year. They've really started moving quickly on upgrading. And we're on, what are we on, 8 now? So, you know, we were on 5.6 and all that for a long, long time. It never moved. And now, and then it went, you know, 7 and 7.4 and all these, and it jumped really quickly. And so keeping an eye, what an end of life review is looking into the future to see, all right, I need to read the docs for WordPress and see when are they going to no longer support PHP 5.6. And usually they document that, especially the core, WordPress core, right? Working with Drupal in the past, Drupal had the same kind of thing. So a lot of these tools have sort of a roadmap for when they're going to drop support for these versions of PHP. So that's the big one. Apache, though, comes in there, databases, sometimes plugins, right? Say that, you know, they're going to, you could go either way. Either WordPress will no longer support a plugin because it's not being updated, or vice versa, a plugin that you're using isn't going to support an old version of WordPress. So keeping an eye on those things, especially some of these plugins that like are really big, they do a lot for you. You want to make sure that you're on top of that. If this plugin doesn't work, your whole site doesn't work, kind of thing. So you want to keep an eye on, even plugins can have PHP support levels too. So doing a scan, looking through all those things, that can be a little bit technical to kind of know where to look for plugins, and reading docs and those kinds of things, and finding the web pages that list those things. So that's what that's talking about. So.
All right, with 1 minute left, thank you, everybody. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer those. If before you leave, you would like to put in the chat or tell us anything you'd like to hear from Pixo in the future that's around these topics. I'm looking at putting together some more content to be able to share Pixo's knowledge, whether that's related to WordPress development in general, content strategy, user experience. If there's anything that's kind of on your mind, we're looking at putting together things that people are interested in hearing. So let us know. Happy to have you guys here join us today. Thank you, Jason. You did great.
Thank you.
Round of applause. Thanks,
Anything,
everyone.
any last words? Otherwise, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
See you next time.